All right, let's learn some Photoshop. In this video, we're going to learn how to make our way around Photoshop's interface so that we can use basic features that would be essential to any project. We'll be designing a name card as our example project. So let's get started. Okay, I'm opening Photoshop. This is Photoshop 2020. There's a lot new in this version. I'm getting a little message here that's telling me that. I'm gonna just pass that for now and come upon the home screen for Photoshop. Sort of like their website. There's some recent things that I've been working on, and they've got like links to services and features. But we're just going to get started. We're going to click this button here, Create New, on the left side. Go ahead and click that. Get going. A name card is it's like a business card, but it focuses on you as a person, as an individual, as opposed to the organization you might be representing. So we're going to set up a business card format here of 3.5 inches wide by 2 inches high. We'll choose 300 pixels per inch. That would be a resolution appropriate for printing. And that's good enough for now. Click the Create button in the lower right. And Photoshop will open up in the workspace with my document to the size specifications that I just set. So this workspace view is worth a look if you're new to Photoshop. At the top of your desktop is the Photoshop menu bar. These are all the different features that Photoshop offers. This would be kind of where we would go if we want to really rummage through everything that Photoshop's about. The interface itself has other ways to get to everything in the menu bar. And so, choosing something from the interface might be a faster way to get to a tool or to a feature. There's a tool panel here on the left side. They're icon based, but if you hover your mouse over a tool, then a tooltip pop-up will come up that tells you about what that tool is. Also, you can right-click on any of these tools with your mouse, and it will show you different variations of each tool. So each tool has an identity, got a name, and then it has variations. So you can explore both by hovering and then right-clicking respectively. There's an options panel right up here at the top of the workspace. This options panel is giving you access to settings for whatever tool you are using. So if you watch this panel here, as I move through these tools and select these tools, the items that show up in this options panel will change. So here's my move tool. I've got some specific items here that are particularly for the move tool. If I use this selection tool, the options change. If I use this gradient tool, the options change. So just know that not only can you choose a tool, but then you have access to the specific options for that tool. On the right side here, it's a fairly sizable amount of the interface, almost 1/3, are the control windows. So these give you access to certain properties for things that you might be working on or things that are in the document. We'll get into this a lot. There's quite a lot of real estate taken up in the interface for these windows. It's because there are so many possible controls. If you look in the Windows section of your menu, you'll see all of the different types of controls. The ones that have a check mark next to them are the ones that are available to me in the interface right now. So you'll see there's a character window that's checked. That's right here. That's this character window right here. There's a layers window that's right down here. I can turn on access to any of these windows by simply selecting, and then it's going to add that control window into this area. You can see it could get very crowded. If you want to get rid of one of these, so let's say I'm not so interested in the library at the moment, I can use this little icon at the top of the particular window panel and see a whole bunch of more options, and I can say close tab group. So it'll make it go away. I'm going to get rid of learn too. Just make that go away. Create a little bit more space here in the workspace. So what we're going to do in this video is get familiar with the interface. We're not going to do anything too fancy design-wise, but we're just going to use what we have access to within this interface to create a very simple layout for a name card. So we're going to play with typography. We're going to learn a little bit about layers. We're going to learn how to apply color, maybe a few other things. This is a little bit improvisational. I'm just, I thought maybe a name card would be a good kind of familiar project that that we could all approach and learn about Photoshop while we're doing this. Because it's very frustrating if you've got these big ideas, but you don't have any experience with Photoshop. You end up maybe not being so happy about Photoshop. So we want to be happy about Photoshop. We want to learn everything that we can about this program so that we can get it to work for us. Okay, so first thing we're going to do to make a name card is put down some type. So there's a tool here. It's called the type tool. It's got this little T. So I'm going to click it, and you'll see that when I bring my cursor over onto my document, the icon for the cursor is now different from normal. It's not just the arrow. It's a little character bar. So I can click now, use this type tool cursor and click into the document, and an interface will come up where I can type in some text. So I'm just going to type in my name. Okay. It's invisible. It's invisible because the color of the type is coming down as white. I'm not sure why that is, but if you look here, my tool is set to text, to type, and my options bar for this type tool shows me a little white box here. This is a color swatch box. So it's telling me the color of the text that I'm putting down is white. I can click on this box and I'll get the color picker dialog box, and I can now change the color to anything I want on this color spectrum, which basically includes every color that's out there. So I'm going to just click in to this color field, and you'll see not only the swatch changes color to what I just selected, but the text that I put in also now takes that color. So there's a relationship between everything you're doing in one window to another. So Photoshop's very powerful in that sense. I'm going to pick black for now. I can actually click down in this area and explore the different colors and the different tones within the range of a color selection. When I let go, that's equivalent to committing this color from the picker over to the selected color and then over to the element that is taking on this color. You'll see there's a whole bunch of other little inputs here. Therefore, you to specify very precise color tone based on a particular color space. We'll get into that later in the course. I'm just going to click OK. So I want it black. So I'm going to set it to hex color 0s, which is a true black, and I'll click OK. So here I am in the text tool. I can see my text cursor, so I know I can click in and I can advance, character by character through this, or I can select all these characters. If I wanted to make this this text bigger, because I'm kind of feeling it, I could do it in a number of ways. I can always look up into the options menu to take a look at these different options for text. I can change the font. Maybe I'll change the font to something that reflects my style. That's just a joke. But you see how there's all these fonts here. So you really can go figure out a font that's appropriate. I'm just going to pick something that maybe is sort of big, thick, has a lot of weight, has sort of a graphic kind of quality. I'm going to be sort of arbitrary about it. Well, okay, I guess I'll do this one. And then you can select a style if there are different weight styles. This one doesn't have any. And then you can pick a size. Okay, this might be a little too big. If you're exploring these drop downs and you don't see a size that you like, or if you have a very specific size that you want, you can actually just type into the input field and then enter something specifically. And you can use fractions. So enter. Okay. Photoshop, the type tool, also has there's so many features. So as the course goes on, we'll just have to explore them all. I'm not going to get into every single option whenever we encounter a tool, but you will learn over time that you have a lot of control every step of the way when you're working Photoshop. I'm going to move this text from its position here in the upper left to something more centered. I'm going to use this move tool. So I'm going to change tools now by now clicking on this tool. And now I can grab this element, just click on any part of any of the type here, and now I can drag it anywhere I want. I can even drag it off the document. If I drag it off the document, it's basically not going to print anywhere. So I'm going to bring it into a position that might be appropriate for a name card and release my mouse. So what else does a name card need? It needs your name and needs some contact information. So let me do that. I'll put a phone number. Let's see what the phone number is here. Okay. Let's choose the type tool again. And I'm going to put in a different piece of type. Okay. So there's my type. I'm going to change the size of this so that it's not so big. Oops, let's select it off. Do that. Maybe I'll, maybe I don't want it to be as, have the same weight. So let's look for something else. I think I'll stay in this universe family. Okay. Another thing I'll point out here is you see as I'm moving this text around, that little vertical line shows up. This is an alignment marker that Photoshop just has working, monitoring my elements passively. As I scoot this element, this phone number element, left and right, it's actually telling me when it's dead center with the element above it, my name. So that's really handy. So here I've got a basic name card. This is really, the essential. Maybe I should put an email in there, but what I want to point out right now is that we've now created a couple of layers. We've got a name layer and a phone number layer. If you go look over here in the control windows, there is this layers window. It's fairly important. So I'm going to actually rip it out of this sidebar. You can just grab any window in kind of an inactive area. I'm just going to grab it right here. I'm just going to pull it into the workspace. Make it a little bit bigger so that we can pay more attention to this. These items in this list are the layers of my document. So it works like this. This list is sequential. So the item on top is the topmost element. It's kind of like a gigantic graphic design sandwich, and you're looking down at the sandwich, and the thing that's on the top is going to be covering the things that are underneath it. So right now, my phone number is going to cover anything that's underneath it. Underneath it is my name, and then this background. So the reason why the phone number doesn't get in the way of the name is because they occupy a different position in space in the layout. To see how this works, let's zoom in first. I'm going to use the zoom tool, which is this magnifying glass. And once I'm in zoom mode, my cursor now changes. It looks like a magnifying glass. And inside that icon, the magnifying glass, is a little plus sign. So that means I'm going to zoom in. If I click on this now, I'm going to zoom in to my project. And I'm going to take these elements of text and then push them over each other so we can get to experience what it means to have layers and to have a layer sensitive layout. So here is my name text. I'm going to actually select the layer, the name text, and we'll go back into, I'm going to choose the type tool, go back into the type and change it from black to something else. Change it to red. Mainly this is so that we can start seeing the relationship of layers as they relate to each other. So if I take this phone number, which is the top layer, and I move it into the same space as the text of the name, look what happens. Okay, let's just zoom in and take a closer look. You can see here that the phone number in black appears above the name, which is in red. And that is because the phone number layer here is above the name layer, which is underneath it. Now, one thing you can do in Photoshop, set up all these layers, you can move the layer sequence. You can change that sequence simply by rearranging these layers in this list. And let's see what happens when I take the phone number layer, which is currently on top, and I move it into second position so that it's underneath. Let's see what happens on the document when I do that. To do this, I'm going to select the layer I want to move, then click and hold this layer. You can see now I'm able to move it. My cursor changes to a hand. That means I can now do something with this layer in relation to the list. And if I move it around the list, you'll see that when there's an option to move it somewhere that is a new position, it lights up in blue. You see how that little blue line has shown up? That means it's going to, if I let go of the mouse, it's going to drop it right here. So let's do that. Okay, now you can see the function of layers. I've rearranged the layer list. The name layer is now on top. Now the telephone number is behind the name layer. So my phone number is behind my name. It's all about the layers. Okay. And for that matter, this whole white background is because the bottom layer is white. If I were to choose another tool, there's a paint bucket tool. It's located, kind of hid it away here. There's a gradient tool. If I right click the gradient tool, there's a paint bucket tool as an alternative option to the gradient. So I'm going to choose that. And let's see. I've got a color picker tool here, foreground, background color. And the foreground color is green right now. So I'm going to just take my paint bucket tool, which is set to drop in a color, whatever I've set as the foreground color. I'm going to go to the background layer, and then I'm going to click into this layer. And now it's repainted, recolored that background layer as green instead of white. And now you can actually see that my name card is completely ready for the Christmas season. No, my name card is now showing me that the name text is on top, the telephone number is underneath it, and then the background color is underneath all of that. So I'm going to grab the phone number information by selecting the layer and then moving it back down into its own, moving it back down into its own spot in the layout. It's doing this because I'm not grabbing, because my text is really big. There we go. Okay, I need to zoom out now. I need to see the whole layout so that I can position these elements properly. So I'm going to go to the zoom tool, and to get to, I've got the plus sign here, so I'm just going to keep zooming in if I click. But if I hold the option key down while I'm using the zoom tool, you'll see that the icon inside the magnifying glass changes from a plus to a minus. So that means I can zoom out. So I'm going to zoom out until I can see this whole file. And now I'm going to go to the move tool, and I'm going to move around my elements until they look properly balanced in relation to each other. Another thing you can do if you're moving elements around and you don't want to use the mouse, you can use your arrow keys. So I'm going to use my arrow keys and watch what happens to the phone number. It's moving 1 pixel at a time. Every depress of an arrow key will move it in that arrow direction 1 pixel. Okay. Let's see. You can see here we're actually using a lot of features from both the tool panel, the tool menu, the options menu, and these control windows. There's a whole bunch here, and it could go on forever. I don't really need it to for the purpose of this this assignment. What I'm going to do now is change it back to a black and white type of layout, because this would be a name card that maybe I want to just get printed. Maybe I want to print it myself, and I don't want to get a lot of colors involved. So I'm going to go back to the background. I'm going to reselect my foreground color here and choose white. Or maybe I'll do it this way. I'll use the RGB color space right here, RGB, set it to 255 all the way across, which is white. We will get into color spaces and the values and all that in time. So I've set that. Go to my paint bucket tool, drop in the white, go to my text. I'm going to recolor the text, but instead of doing it in this other way where I chose the tool and then chose the option, I'm going to go here and try this control window this time. because now that I've selected this text, I can just go right into the swatch and set it to black. Okay. So this should be a reminder that there's more than one way to do pretty much anything you want in Photoshop. So if you learn one way, that's great, but don't feel like that's the only way. In fact, don't develop a dependency on that way. There's usually a different way, and it might be useful when you need to get kind of a different overall effect. That's what's great about Photoshop, is you can kind of combine or rethink the way you want to generate any type of design. Okay, so I'm going to just create a little bit more balance in this very simple layout. Bring the name card a little bit higher and take this phone number and bring it a little bit lower. Maybe I'll introduce an email. I could use the text tool and enter another piece of text, or I can go to this layer menu, and let's say I want to just reuse the font and the size and the color that's being expressed in this phone number layer. I could just right click on the phone number layer. A set of options appears, and I can choose duplicate layer. I'm going to name this email information. Okay, so now I've got a new layer called email information. Where is it? Well, if I grab it from here, there it is. It just copied the layer. So now I can go into this layer and change it to my phone, to my email. Okay. And I'll just do manual centering. All right, that's looking good. Let's add on, since we're doing so well at exploring the interface. I've now got two secondary text lines here that have some contact information, and I want to now move them around. If I said, hey, I want to move this one up here, and then I need to move this one here, look at what I need to do. All these extra steps are involved now, because I've got to move this second one in relation to the first one, and then I've got to center it because you know, I used my mouse and it drifted a little bit to the left or the right. Well, one thing you can do instead of using your mouse is you can group layers together. So I'm going to select one layer, then I'm going to hold down, whoops, sorry. Then I'm going to hold down my command key and select again. And now I've got both of these layers highlighted. If I move one of them, make sure I'm in the move tool, they're going to both move, right? Because I've selected them both. So whether I'm using my mouse or whether I'm using arrows, they're now selected together, and they will move together. And if I want to undo this, I simply hold down the command key and then deselect the element that's selected. So really, really useful. You always have plenty of control in Photoshop. So I'm going to move this using my arrow keys now. I need to have the move tool set. Okay. All right. So this looks fine for me for now. You now have a name card if you're designing along with the video. It's now time to save the file. Right now, if you look up here at the top of this workspace, there's a little tab here that tells you some information about the file that's in your workspace. And this is an untitled file. It means we haven't really saved it yet. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. File, save. When you're saving in Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud version, you can actually save to the cloud, which is useful if you're working in different locations. You can just put that file on the cloud and then pick it up at your next location. I'm going to save mine on my desktop on my computer. Choose this option here. When I save this Photoshop file, I want to choose the format that is appropriate for my purpose. The purpose for saving this file right now as is, I'm going to choose Photoshop. What that means is that it's going to save this document plus all of these layers, understanding all of the settings in each layer. And it's going to give me a chance to reopen this file and continue working on it. Let's say I want to make some changes, or I want to redesign it, or I want to add color. I can do that very easily if it's a Photoshop file. The file format for Photoshop files are up here, .psd. Photoshop document, PSD is what that stands for. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And I'll just say, okay, it's compatibility business. And here it is. It's now on my desktop. So I've just saved this. When you have a document, and it's a Photoshop file, that PSD is really set up for you to use within Adobe's world of creative software. So I can open it in Photoshop, keep working on it. I could open it in another Adobe program like After Effects and start animating, using it to source an animation. I could bring it into Premiere and use it as a graphic, that sort of thing. Because those other Adobe programs can recognize the layers in this Photoshop document and work with them independently of each other. So that's something kind of really cool. But as graphic designers, typically you'll be designing something in Photoshop and you'll need to produce a file that's going to be appropriate for whatever production workflow that this design is headed for. So example would be print or web, very different, right? So they require different files and they require, your file to be prepared in a certain way. So part of this assignment is also learning how to export your design in these different formats. We'll go over that right now. I just made a PSD file, Photoshop file, so I can bring it back into Photoshop or bring it into some other Adobe software. What I'm going to do now is export as a TIFF file. There's a format called TIFF, and that would be something that a printer would really need. It's a high resolution file format. So I'm going to go here and I'll choose File, Save As. Okay, so the difference between Save and Save As is when you choose Save As, you're creating another copy of your file in possibly another format or the same format with a different name. When you choose Save, you're overwriting the file that already exists. So keep that in mind. I'm going to save to the computer, and I'm going to call this for printer. Right now it's going to be a Photoshop document, but I'm going to go down to Format and look for the TIFF format, TIFF. Okay, and it's going to change that file format extension for me. I'll hit Save. Now, for most formats, there will be a step here where Photoshop's going to ask you if you want to have any special options set for that format. For our purposes right now, none of these are really too important. I just want a TIFF file. Okay, and here I go. Now I've got two different formats of the same file. Same design, but one's a PSD, one's a TIFF. This one I'm going to go send to my printer. This one I'm going to keep here and open up and modify. Okay. Another format that we want to know how to do is to send out a JPEG. This would be a lower resolution file format that compresses the file size considerably and will work as an attachment in email or as a graphic on a web page. Okay, so I'm back in my now let's go back to my Photoshop document. I'm gonna actually get this PSD, and to open it I could double click it or I could drag it onto my Photoshop icon, either way. So I'm got this PSD. I'm now going to there's a couple ways to do it, but we'll just stick with save as for now. Save as, and we're going to explore yet another format, the JPEG format. We'll just use this JPEG format. Okay. And click save. So you can see with this save as function, it's very powerful. You can send your document out in a number of different formats. The JPEG options here relate to compression. You can actually see that it will calculate the size, will it? Yeah, if I check this preview option. Maximum quality, it's 112K. That's really small. That's quite small. If I throttle down the image quality, it gets even smaller. We're just going to leave it at maximum. And there we go. On the desktop here, we've got the Photoshop document, the TIFF file, and the JPEG. Here's another thing about Photoshop is you can open multiple documents at the same time. So right now, I've got the PSD open here. This is my file, and this is the little label that's telling me what this file is. So I've got the PSD. I can actually grab the TIFF and the JPEG, also drag it onto my Photoshop icon. Let's see what happens. They've loaded up into Photoshop. Did you notice that this bar here now has loaded up two other items? And they are here's my PSD, here's my JPEG, here's my TIFF. It just so happens that they all are the same, so they kind of look different. But let's say I made some changes here. Let's say on this PSD, for my name, I change it to red. Oops, sorry, you're in character. Let's change it to red. Okay, and if I go to the JPEG, here's my JPEG. Let's say I get my brush tool and I get a nice magenta, and I just kind of like graffiti my JPEG. I go to the TIFF. The TIFF has is recognizing layers. Let's say I take the the contact information and I rotate it. Okay. Just wanted to like introduce a couple more tools here without really having to, get into them too much. Mainly so that now you can see that in the Photoshop interface, you can move through the different items that are loaded by simply navigating these tabs. So here's my PSD, here's my JPEG, and here's my TIFF. Okay. So this feature becomes really useful when you need to bring in a whole bunch of source images so that you can build a composite design. So maybe you bring in a logo, maybe you bring 3 different photos, and then you can kind of take these different source files in their entirety, or just parts of these source files into a new master file and build something, design something, that composites them together. That is something we do later in this course. But anyway, for this assignment, we've got a name card. We can take it places. Um, we can export it in a number of different ways, and we can start sharing it immediately. So we'll call it a day for this video. We've gone through a lot. And there's a lot that we can make use of in Photoshop just for even a very simple kind of classic restrained design. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your project.